Whenever you clap your hands in an empty hall, the sound travels outward and then returns to you. That's physics. But there's a psychological version of that same phenomenon that most people never learned to notice. When a child reaches out emotionally, they are waiting for something to come back, not necessarily advice, not even full sentences. Sometimes it's just a softened expression, a pause, a hand on their shoulder, a face that shifts in a way that says, "I see you. You make sense." But when nothing returns one, the feeling hits the walls and disappears into silence. The child doesn't assume the room failed. Children don't think like that. They assume the sound itself wasn't important enough to be answered. And that's usually where the story begins. For decades, psychology has framed trauma as something visible, something with edges. A car accident, an assault, a moment you could circle on a timeline and say, "There, that's when everything changed." And for many people, that's true. But there's another category of pain that rarely gets named because from the outside, it doesn't look like anything happened at all. The house was intact. Food was on the table. The parents might have even been physically present. No one writes a memoir about the birthday that passed quietly without acknowledgement, or about crying behind a closed bedroom door and realizing no one was coming, or about watching a parent's attention drift away the moment you tried to talk about something that mattered to you. Absences don't photograph well. They are hard to explain without feeling dramatic, but they leave impressions all the same, subtle, steady, and long-lasting. Invisible doesn't mean insignificant. Psychologists call this childhood emotional neglect, and part of why it went unnoticed for so long is embedded in its definition. It isn't marked by what did occur, but by what repeatedly didn't. The attunement that never arrived, the emotional reflection that was missing. Here's the developmental truth underneath it. Children learn about their inner world the same way they learn words through someone reflecting it back. When a caregiver says, "You seem upset. Did something hurt your feelings?" they are doing something profound. They are teaching the child that emotions are real, that they can be named, that they deserve acknowledgement. When that reflection rarely happens or happens so inconsistently that it never quite lands, the child grows into an adult who struggles to recognize what they are feeling at all. There's a clinical term for this, alexithymia. It refers to difficulty identifying and describing emotions. Research has repeatedly linked higher rates of it to early emotional neglect. It's not a character flaw. It's an emotional vocabulary that was never fully taught. Imagine living your whole life in a space where nothing echoes, and then being told, just speak louder. In adulthood, this often creates a pattern clinicians recognize immediately, but the person living it finds deeply confusing. These are frequently high-functioning individuals, responsible, capable, the dependable one. The person everyone assumes is okabakaz, appearing okay, became second nature long ago. Dr. Jonas Webb, who brought wider clinical attention to childhood emotional neglect, often describes clients who don't arrive with a dramatic complaint. Instead, they describe a persistent sense of something being off, not quite depression, not textbook anxiety, more like an emotional dullness, as if life is happening at a slight distance, as if everyone else has access to a frequency they can't quite tune into. And then there are relationships. This is where it can become especially painful. The person who once felt unseen doesn't just struggle with closeness, they may instinctively disrupt it. Someone offers a heartfelt compliment, and they immediately deflect. Someone shows consistent, steady love, and it feels uncomfortable instead of safe, suspicious even, like you're bracing for it to disappear. Which makes sense. If connection was unpredictable growing up, you would have eventually stopped relying on it. You adapted. You became independent, self-sufficient, the one who doesn't need much. From the outside, that can look like strength, and in many ways, it was. But it was also a survival strategy. The longing for closeness didn't vanish. It just went underground. Needs don't evaporate. They quiet down when they learn that making noise doesn't change anything. A 2024 review published in Child Abuse, Neglect analyzing dozens of studies, found consistent evidence that adults who experience childhood neglect have greater difficulty regulating emotions later in life. The researchers also emphasized how underexplored emotional neglect remains compared to other forms of childhood adversity. The least visible wounds often receive the least attention. Here's the part that matters most, and I won't overcomplicate it. The way you adapted was not a flaw. It was an intelligent response. You adjusted to what was available. The child who went silent learned that silence reduced risk. The child who became humorous learned laughter secured connection. The overachiever learned that success earned acknowledgement. The caretaker learned that tending to others increased their value. And sometimes, the child simply faded into the background. They used the tools they had donned, they used them well. The complication is that coping strategies don't automatically expire when the environment changes. You may not be in that emotionally quiet room anymore, but parts of your nervous system still behave as if you are. Flinching at intimacy. Feeling uneasy when someone is genuinely kind. Struggling to identify your own feelings as if they're coming from behind a wall. The hopeful part is this: the brain remains adaptable, even after difficult beginnings. Therapies focused on emotional awareness and attachment can genuinely reshape how someone experiences themselves and others. Healing, though, is rarely dramatic. It doesn't always arrive with a breakthrough moment. Often it involves grieving something abstract comfort you never received, the conversations that never happened, the emotional guidance that should have been there. How do you grieve an absence? How do you process something that left no single memory, only a pattern, slowly, and usually not alone? But it begins smaller than therapy. It begins with taking your internal experience seriously. Just because no one responded when you needed them doesn't mean your needs were unreasonable. They weren't. On a practical level, this looks ordinary. You notice you're irritated, and instead of dismissing it as overreacting, you pause. You let the feeling exist for a moment. You catch yourself brushing off a compliment and ask, gently, why did that feel uncomfortable? You begin paying attention to your inner world. That might sound minor until you realize that for some people, no one ever modeled that attention at all. Change doesn't happen overnight, but every time you check in with yourself honestly, something recalibrates. For someone who grew up without emotional echoes, learning to hear yourself may be the most important shift of all. There's a certain kind of person who finds content like this late at night, who scrolls past the phrase emotional neglect and feels a quiet recognition, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just a subtle, almost private sense of, that sounds familiar. If that's happening for you, pay attention to it. Naming something doesn't solve it instantly, but recognition is a beginning. It's your nervous system responding to itself. It's an echo forming for the first time. The sound was never the problem. You'd always deserved a response. Sometimes it just needed a different space to return from. If this gave language to something you've been carrying quietly, consider staying connected. I share explorations like this regularly, and there's more to unpack. If you'd like to directly support the work, there's an option to do that as well. And you might find yourself reflected in some of the other videos on the screen. I'll see you there.